we navigate throughout this new and uncharted territory, mastering the arts of persuasion remains an important skill that must be developed. In the subsequent slides, I'm going to talk about what persuasion is and teach you ways that you can speak in a persuasive manner. So before we can talk about how to speak persuasively, we must first define what it is. According to textbook author Stephen E. Lucas, persuasion is defined as the process of creating, reinforcing, and changing people's beliefs or actions. Can you think of any times where you spoke persuasively in order to accomplish an objective? We learn to speak persuasively when we are very young in order to get what we want. For example, candy. From our parents and continue to develop this skill as we get older in order to get jobs, advocate for ourselves and others, and gain money and power. If you're thinking about becoming a politician, activist, public relations specialist, sales representative, or lawyer after graduating from Brooklyn College, you will definitely need to know how to speak persuasively. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to talk about the principles of persuasion that are applicable to the art of public speaking. So, when using the art of persuasion, it is important to do so with morally and integrity. So, in order to achieve your objective through persuasion, when public speaking, you must not lie, stereotype, use abusive language, or falsify statistics because doing so would be unethical. So, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, it is not possible to bring about a truly beneficial result by using ethical methods. Even if you are able to accomplish a short-term goal by using unethical methods of persuasion, that will ultimately hinder you in the long run by diminishing your credibility as a speaker. So, persuasion becomes important when dealing with topics that people disagree on. The truth of the matter is that a persuasive speaker, you may not able to necessarily change the views of the people you're trying to convince. However, you get them to re-examine and contemplate their beliefs, you can consider yourself successful. So the degree of success that you reach as a public speaker is determined by how well you can tailor your message to your unique audience, an audience which is filled with people who embrace certain values, beliefs, and attitudes. So persuading as a public speaker involves a mental dialogue between the speaker and the audience. Even though the audience members will not be able to voice their questions and criticisms, speakers must respond to them in their speeches by imagining how audience members would respond. So listeners process persuasive messages to varying degrees based on the speaker's credibility, delivery, supporting materials, language, reasoning, and emotional appeals. Based on how they process the speaker's message, listeners can be anywhere from strongly opposed to neutral to strongly in favor. So, a speaker will not be able to appeal to the entire audience through their speech, no matter how hard they try. However, good public speakers must identify their largest audience, which is that particular part of the whole audience that they want to reach with their speech. So, in order to figure out where the audience stands on certain issues, speakers can hand out audience analysis questionnaires. So, questions of fact deal with the validity or falsity of an assertion. So persuasive speeches on questions of fact are similar to the informative speeches that we worked on in class during the past few weeks. So during these speeches, speakers try to use available fact in order to make well-informed predictions and decisions. So these speeches are organized topically as they state the specific purpose of the speech, the central idea, and the reasons for believing a particular fact. So see slide 6 for an example provided in the textbook. So questions of value quite oppositely deal with the worth of rightness of a particular idea or action. So persuasive speeches on questions of value are similar to the persuasive speeches that we are going to present in subsequent weeks in the class. So these kinds of speeches not only try to convince people to have the same value judgments as the speaker, but also use the facts to justify such value judgments. So like persuasive speeches on questions of fact, persuasive speeches on questions of value are also organized topically as they state the specific purpose of the speech, the central idea, and the reasons for believing a particular fact. See slide 7 for an example provided in the textbook. So, questions of policy deal with whether or not a particular course of action should be taken. These kinds of questions always involve questions of fact and can also include questions of value. There are 3 different types of speeches on questions of policy, each one differing based on the goal that the speaker wants to achieve. So the first type is passive agreement speeches, where the speaker's goal is to get the audience to agree that a certain course of action is desirable, necessary, and or practical without prompting them to take action. The second type is speeches to gain immediate action, in which the speaker's goal is to convince the audience to act now in support of a particular course of action. Regardless of what the speaker's goal is, persuasive speeches on questions of policy require the speaker to establish a need for the policy they are arguing for. So present a plan for solving the problem once they have shown what the problem exists, and establish that the plan will actually work and solve the problem instead of making it worse. So while speeches on questions of fact and value are organized topically, there are actually 4 different ways to organize speeches on questions of policy, with the first one being problem solution order. So in problem solution order speeches, the speaker first presents the problem and subsequently discusses how it can be solved. Problem co-solutions order is another way to organize speeches on question of policy and can be considered an expansion on problem solution order. So while the first main point is of the kind of speech establishes the problem that the last main point presents, solution to the problem, the second or middle point explains why the problem exists. While the 2 aforementioned methods of speech organization dedicate time to establishing that a problem exists, the third way to organize speeches on questions of policy is called comparative advantage order. So comparative advantage order speeches can only be used when the audience already knows that a problem exists, as the main points are dedicated to exploring why a speaker's proposed solution to the problem is the most favorable course of action. Last but not least, the 4th way of organizing speeches on questions of policy is called Monroe's motivated sequence. These kind of speeches prompt people to take to steps of Monroe's sequence makes the audience feel a need for change by presenting the problem. The 3rd step of this sequence presents a solution that satisfies the sequence of need that was established in previous steps. The 4th step of Monroe's motivated sequence involves visualization, which uses imagery to show the audience how the speaker's proposed course of action will benefit them. And the 5th and final step of the sequence establishes what the audience should do and how they can do it. So during this presentation, I presented the definition of persuasion, the ethical concerns that are raised by persuasive speech, the psychology of persuasion, and the different kinds of questions that persuasive speeches address. Amidst this pandemic, there is no better time to utilize the persuasive methods that I've discussed during this presentation to persuade people to stay home. Thank you so much for watching, and please stay safe.